If you're looking to capture gameplay from a video games console or capture footage from a camera, you might want to look at this. This is the Elgato HD60 S Plus, and this has just been released here in the UK. What I'd like to do in this video is take a detailed look at this. I'd like to show you what it can do. I'd like to draw some comparisons between the HD60 S Plus and the original HD60 S and help you make a decision as to whether this is something you would like to buy. Now, this will be a long-ish video, so please do check the description area and look at the video timeline, and feel free to jump to the part of the video which is relevant to you. So you can see that there is a little bit of an Elgato party going on my desk here. And interestingly, all of these products which I've bought over the last few years, all of these are still being used on a day-to-day basis with my recording setup. I've got the cam link here, which is used to connect to my overhead camera here. That's how I'm capturing footage from my overhead camera. I've got the Stream Deck here, which is allowing me to change cameras very easily. It allows me to do a lot of things very easily. And I've got the HD60 S, and the HD60 S is what I've been using to capture gameplay from the Nintendo Switch, from the new Sega Mega Drive Mini, from my PlayStation 4, from all the consoles I've been recording gameplay from the last few years. It's been recorded through this, but the HD60 S Plus is, of course, the newest version. Now, if you actually look at them here, if I get in focus, you can see that, well, they look identical. And from the outside, they are identical. There's no difference in weight or design or anything like that. But there are obviously differences inside. The HD60 S Plus is without doubt a more powerful device and a more versatile device. Now, the Cam Link, the Stream Deck and the HD60 S, these all require drivers to work. You do not need a driver for the HD60 S Plus to work. This is UVC. It's USB video class, which effectively means that it's plug and play, which means that when you connect a camera or a games console to this, you plug into your computer and your computer will just recognize it as a webcam. In short, it just works. You don't have to mess about with drivers, rolling back drivers, updating drivers. It will just work. And I'm really glad that Elgato have went down this route. Now, as I was saying, from a hardware point of view, at least from the outside, it looks the same, but it's the same in the box as well. The box is actually bigger, and I'll show you this in a second. The box is bigger, but you get an HDMI cable and you get like it's like about a 2 meter USB Type-C cable. And the only real difference here is that it seems to be a little bit gold at the end here. Previously, with the older version, it was silver. But apart from that, the cables look identical. So there's not really any difference there as far as the HDMI cable and the USB Type-C cable that is provided. But what I'd like to do at this point is just quickly jump over to my browser, maybe give you a better understanding as to, as to what this can actually do. This is the Elgato website, HD60 S Plus, and yeah, you can see it here. Plug and play. This can capture 1080p at 60 frames per second. Now, you can see some of the main differences here. This can now capture HDR at 1080p. Now, it can also take a 4K connection at 60 frames per second with HDR, but it really is just for pass-through, which means that you can play in your PlayStation 4 Pro or your Xbox One X, and you can play at 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR enabled, HDR10, but it will not be recorded at that. It will be recorded at 1080p if you're playing the game at 4K at 60 frames per second. Now, you've got flashback recording, live commentary as well. You can actually use their software. Like many people, I will be using OBS. But if I go down here as well, you can see what it's talking about. Instant game view, flashback recording. So that's all about their software, really. That's about their software. And then you've got the device itself. Now, I purchased it here in the UK for about £190. I was looking on Amazon.com and I don't know, that it doesn't seem to be on Amazon USA yet. It doesn't seem to be on the American Amazon website. So I'm not sure if there's a shortage, if it hasn't been released yet. I'm not sure, but I suspect it's going to be around the same price as what we are paying here in the UK. So it's about £190 right now in the UK. Elgato products generally do keep the price, they keep the prices pretty well until they release another product. But you might pick up a bargain, you know, the Black Friday or Amazon sales. Every now and then they do drop by 20 or 30, but not by much. As far as the naming scheme goes, it is a little bit silly. HD60 S Plus, it's getting a little bit silly, but originally Elgato did a game capture device which was HD 1080p, which is why it was called the Elgato HD. But then they released a version which could do HD at 60 frames per second, HD 60. Then they improved upon it and they did this version, which was a Type-C connection, HD60 S, and now we have the S Plus. I've got those back to front, but you get the point. Yeah, it's getting a little bit silly because, I mean, what do they do next? The Plus Plus, they have to change it at one point. Kind of irrelevant, but just in case you're getting mixed up, this is why it's called the HD60 S Plus. They've simply added more letters, more characters to the brand over time. What we like to do at this point is just kind of quickly go over to my overhead camera and I'll give you a closer look at the boxes and the devices. So get these in the right position here. I will zoom out, not in. And what I would like to show you here is just kind of the difference in the boxes, because if you look here at the sides, you can see that the box is double the size, but there's nothing extra going on here. It really is just space from there to there. They've just, the way they've packaged it up, there's extra space, but yeah, it's not really doing anything extra. You can see here, USB 3.0, 1080p at 60 frames per second. Now they've got 1080p at 60 with HDR, and they've got 4K at 60 HDR pass-through. There's a few changes on the back as well. Nothing much though. You know, it's saying there GPU, you need a GeForce GTX 600. Now they're saying a GeForce GTX 10 series GPU. So they're now recommending a 10 series card. I suspect most 9 series cards would still be okay, but yeah, better getting a modern GPU if you want to run this. 4 GB of RAM as well. There really isn't a massive difference here, but you can see that it's got HDR 10-bit pass-through for capture resolutions 2160, so 4K at 30 frames per second. This can capture 4K at 30 frames per second, which might be good for some games, but I would really be looking at this as a way to capture footage from a camera. 1080p at 60, 1080p at 30, 1080i, 720p at 60, 576p, 480p. So yes, this is a very flexible device. And if you've never seen it before, I will show you the actual devices here. And if I can zoom in a little bit. So, not much difference here, is there? I mean, apart from this Plus, it's exactly the same. These things are identical. On the back, the only difference is it used to be made in Germany, now it seems to be made in the Netherlands, but the ports are all the same. In fact, have they switched them around? Have they? Yeah, they've actually, let me see if I got this the wrong way around. No, they've got it the exact same position. So they've got the audio in port, they've got the HDMI in, and then you've got the USB Type-C, which goes to Type A, which goes to your computer, and on the other side you've got HDMI out. So effectively what happens is you put the HDMI input here from your camera or from your Nintendo Switch or PlayStation or Xbox. It goes in here. Now you do not have to use this, but you do have to use this if you want to see it on your television. Now if you just want to capture it through OBS and record through OBS or XSplit or Elgato's own HD capture software, then you don't have to use this if you're playing directly through your laptop or computer. But I think most people will use this output here so that they can output output the signal to a television, and it means that you can record and you can play at the same time. They do provide one HDMI cable. It's where is it? There, it's here. Kind of basic. I'm assuming it is 4K enabled, seeing as that this has got 4K 60 pass-through and 4K 30 recording. There's no branding on it, doesn't say Elgato or anything like that, but the cables are thick. They look well made, and what I would say is that after owning an HD60 S for a couple of years, my cable looks, well, brand new. And as I was saying earlier on, it just looks like they've changed to gold for the new version. Before it was kind of silver, but the cables look identical apart from that. So there really isn't a major difference. If you actually look at the devices, the only thing they've really changed here is the Plus. So if you know what the HD60 is all about, you really know what the HD60S Plus is all about. The main reason to upgrade, well, you know, that is a different thing altogether, whether it's worth upgrading or not. It's one of those things, it really does depend on your situation. Personally, for me, I don't actually have a 4K console. I don't have a console that supports HDR, so that is unfortunately something I cannot show you in this video. The reason I upgraded to this version is that I do need another capture device because I'm going to be recording gameplay downstairs and upstairs, so I do need a second device. One other reason is that, yes, I could have just bought another HD60 and I could have paid less, but this supports plug and play. It can record 4K 30 frames per second, and it can support 4K 60 pass-through and 1080p HDR. Now, I don't have 4K 60 for pass-through. I don't have a 4K console, but one of the reasons I'm opting for this one rather than another HD60 S is simply future-proofing myself, because in the future, I might buy another one, but if I stop using this for gameplay, I could use this to capture footage from a camera and I could capture it at 4K. So in my line of work, if you're recording videos for YouTube and things like that, I think it makes more sense to go with the device that's, you know, future-proofing. And the plug-and-play side of it, I think it's more practical as well. My USB Mazewell video capture device is UVC. I don't need software for it. I plug it in, it just works. I'm a big fan of that, and I'm sure that the HD60S Plus will save me a lot of hassle because of it. So whether you upgrade or not, it really does depend on your budget. At the moment, there's only £40 a difference, so prices do change. There's going to be a lot more used bargains for the HD60S, so if you find a used bargain for the HD60S and it's significantly cheaper, and like me, you don't have a 4K console, save some money, buy this second hand. In fact, I did buy this second hand a few years ago, but if you're buying new, at the moment there's only £40 a difference here in the UK. I'm imagining it'll be the same in the USA. I don't think 40 is enough to opt for the older version. Opt for the newer version, get plug and play, future-proof yourself, and give yourself some options a couple of years down the line when you do get a console that does support 4K, 60 frames per second, etc. So what we like to do at this point is plug both of these in. And right now I'm recording this video at 1080p at 30 frames per second. But of course, one of the big selling points of the HD60 S Plus and the S is that they record at 1080p at 60 frames per second. Now, the reason I'm recording this at 1080p at 30 is because I want to show you at 4K at 30 and then downscale it to 1080p in this video. But what I'm going to do is show you some gameplay in a second in this video that is recorded at 30 frames per second, but I'll upload a separate video that is recorded at 60 frames per second, just so that you can see the difference for yourself. I don't imagine there's going to be any differences at all, but you guys can be the judge of that. So I'll get these plugged up. I'll get them plugged in. I'll get these plugged in. I'll get them connected to my computer, and we'll see what this can do from a gameplay recording point of view. So my Nintendo Switch is now connected to the Elgato HD60 S. This is the game capture device which I have used to capture gameplay for the last few years. For the most part, it has always been good. I've never had any major problems with it. And I guess the only thing I would really say is that because it requires a driver to be installed, you do sometimes have to mess about with that, deactivate it, activate it again, and make sure everything's working in that regard. Now, there's actually a boss at this part of the game. I don't want to show you the whole fight. I just really want to show you what's going on here. Just have a look at how this has been recorded. Check for any problems. And I'll just go up and just quickly introduce you to the bad guy. We'll see a quick little introduction here from the dragon. Here is the bad guy. He's coming out. So this has been Super Mario the Nintendo Switch with the HD60 S at 30 frames per second. Let's see how it performs with the HD60 S Plus. So I'm now recording with the Elgato HD60 S Plus. And what I'm going to do here is much the same. I'm going to run around with Mario here. And yeah, just move around, shake around, jump about, throw my hat around. And it'll help us see whether there is a major difference between the two devices when you're capturing footage. Jump about here. Time to go up and see the big bad dragon. Here we go. He's going to come up. Right now. Here we go, here we go. Right. Running around in my pants. What more does someone want? So yeah, this has been Mario Odyssey with the HD60 S Plus. But let's take a look at another game. Let's do some driving. So I'm now recording with the HD60 S again. This is Asphalt 9. And this is the very first level. So I'm recording at 30 frames per second here. Normally I would record at 1080p at 60 frames per second if I was doing a game stream, but it is good to see the difference. So let's do this first little level. I don't know what happened there. I don't know what happened. I did not mean that. I did not mean that. I think I'm close to the finish line. Short little level. And there we go. I have been recording this with the HD60S, the original. Let's see if we see any difference with the HD60S Plus. So I am now recording with the Elgato HD60S Plus. Going to play the same level. And let's see if we see any difference with the new Elgato capture device. Okay, here we go. Yeah, a little bit of boost here. I need to kill some people here, don't I? Apply the brake using ZL, okay. That's the name of the game. Take people out. Need to go on a few ramps as well, I think. So this is the first level, which is why it's kind of easy at this point, but bit of like Burnout. Double crash here. Whoa, look at this. I'm going to get some boost out of this, surely. Or maybe not. Maybe after me saying this was too easy, I am going to come second. I am going to come second. Or maybe not. Oh, I sneaked first. I sneaked first there. Okay. Let's jump back to the HD60S and we'll play some Street Fighter. So for my last game comparison with the HD60S, I'd like to show you Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. I'm playing the arcade game, but it's through the Nintendo Switch. This isn't a version of Street Fighter I actually played a lot. It was the earlier Street Fighters I played more. So I don't know many of these characters. Of course I know Ken. I'll stick to Ken. But yeah, I've never had any problems with the HD60S. I've always thought that it's recorded gameplay really, really well. The distance is so much different. So much different in this game compared to the other versions of the Street Fighter. I'm going to use that as an excuse as to why I'm getting beat here. I somehow pulled off a win. Somehow. Right, see if I can tie it up in one round here. Oh, I caught him in a special. He caught me in a throw. Touché. There we go. So, this has been the HD60 S at 30 frames per second. Let's jump over, we'll connect the HD60 S Plus, and we'll see if we can see any major differences. So I am back recording with the Elgato HD60 S Plus, Elgato's latest video capture device. And I'll put on Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. I will go Ken again. Yeah, I'll try this one. Let's see if we notice any difference here. Now I know this is an old game, but it's quite a quick game as well, so maybe the original one will struggle with certain things. I'm not sure. We'll see that once we look at the gameplay. Kick to the kick. Kicking was the way to win there. Oh, did I catch him? I think I caught him. That was terrible. And I missed him this time, but I'm getting the win anyway. He doesn't seem to be putting up much of a fight here, is he? I've got a cheap win, I'll just do a whirlwind kick. If in doubt. So, this has been the HD60 S Plus. I hope you've enjoyed these comparisons. Hopefully it will help you see if there's any difference between these when recording at 1080p. But now what we'd like to do is move along and see what it's like as a device for recording 4K at 30 frames per second. So what I'm going to do is plug in the HD60 S Plus to this camera. I'm recording right now using the Sony Alpha 6500 and the Elgato HD60 S Plus, and I'm recording at 4K at 30 frames per second, something which this device allows you to do. Now, this clip is being recorded as part of a full review. If you're watching this as part of my full review, then the 4K file has been downscaled to 1080p because the rest of the video has been shot at 1080p. But this part of the video, this clip, has also been uploaded separately to YouTube, so check it out there. And if you are watching that clip on YouTube, then make sure that you change the resolution to 4K so that you can see this whole part of the video at 4K at 30 frames per second. Now, the Elgato HD60 S and the S Plus are both known for being able to capture gameplay from Nintendo Switch, Xbox, PlayStation, basically any console, because you can record footage directly from any console that's got an HDMI port, but you can also connect to older consoles and record gameplay from those as well, simply using a component cable or something like that. Now, both of these are marketed as being a way to capture game footage, but they can both capture footage from cameras as well. The HD60 S can do 1080p at 60 frames per second. This can do it 1080p at 60 frames per second as well, but as I was saying, the HD60 S Plus can also record at 4K at 30 frames per second. Now, this is not for everyone, but it does give you a few options. If you wanted to, you could use this to record gameplay at 4K at 30 frames per second, but I think most game streamers would opt to record at 1080p at 60 frames per second. But from a camera point of view, from a recording footage point of view, you will get better quality recording at 4K at 30 frames per second and then downscaling down to 1080p. Give you a little bit more flexibility as far as zooming in and different things as well. Of course, stating the obvious here, you do need a camera that can record at 4K at 30 frames per second, but there's a lot of cameras out there now that can do that. A lot of cameras are now giving the option of recording at 4K at 30 frames per second. Most action cameras do it as well. And the Elgato HD60 S Plus does give you that option. So if you are primarily using this to record game footage, it's all good, but down the line, you might want to use this to record footage from your camera as well. So yeah, maybe if you upgrade this down the line, you'll start using this to capture footage from your camera. 1080p, 60 frames per second, or 4K at 30 frames per second. But let me know what you think about this. Look at the original clip, look at the downscale clip, and you'll get a better understanding of the difference in quality. What we'd like to do at this point of the video is summarise my thoughts on the Elgato HD60 S Plus. Now, if you compare the features of the HD60 S and the HD60 S Plus, the S Plus has improved in 4 areas. Firstly, it offers 4K at 60 frames per second pass-through. It also offers 1080p at 60 frames per second, which was offered there, but now it supports HDR10. 4K at 30 frames per second is now possible as well. And the last feature is, well, it's plug and play. You don't need to mess about with any drivers now. Now, of those 4 new features, I have tested 2 of them because I was not able to test the pass-through capability or the HDR recording. I don't have a PlayStation 4 Pro. I don't have an Xbox One X. So I apologise about that. It is something that I would have liked to have shown you guys, but I don't have those consoles. So if I had those consoles, I would have tested me playing a game at 4K 60 frames per second on a television and then showed you it recording at 1080p at 60 frames per second. Now, the lack of HDR being recorded there is perhaps why the gameplay didn't really look that different. Now, I've looked at the clips and I've looked at them side by side and I had a real closer look at them. I was really looking for something that was different. Now, when I was recording, I was looking over at OBS there. I was looking at the recording software, and it looked like the S Plus was better. It looked like the quality was better, but when I actually looked at the recorded footage, it didn't look that much different. Now, that's to be expected because from a 1080p 60 frames per second recording point of view, it's much the same. Now, I'm not sure if this is because of the games I chose, but I looked at the bit rate for the recordings, for the gameplay recordings, and for the S Plus, the bit rate was slightly higher. So for one of the games, it was like 100 megabytes per second, and it was recording 100 megabytes per second there, but it was like 120. For another game, it was like 180, and it was like 190, 200. So there was like an extra 10 or 20 megabytes per second being recorded. And all other settings in OBS were the same, as far as 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. All other settings were the same. The only difference being that I connected the S Plus instead of the S. And the bitrate was slightly higher. So I don't know why, as far as the hardware point of view. I assume they've just improved in a few areas and maybe that's why the bitrate is a little bit higher. But it was interesting that all the settings were the same and I just switched to the S Plus and the bitrate was just about 10% higher than it normally is. So I reckon there's some minor improvements there, but I didn't really see anything there in those games. I would have liked to have seen HDR. I think we would have seen a bigger difference there. As far as the 4K clip, view the 4K clip in full if you want to see what it can do. I think it's a really good feature of this, and it's maybe not a feature that will really sell this device though. I think that most people will still buy this for game recording. They'll maybe buy it because they like to play their games at 4K and they still want to stream or record at 1080p. But for me, that's a really good feature for me because I think that, initially, right now, I will be using this to record from my PlayStation 4 downstairs. This will be used upstairs here to record my Nintendo Switch, my Wii U and different things. So right now I'm using it as a game capture device, but down the line, if I replace this, if I get a better game capture device, I can use this to capture footage from a camera. So that's a really good selling point for me. Plug and play is one of my favorite features as well. Actually, when I was testing earlier on, the HD60 S, when I took out the HD60 S Plus and I put in the HD60, every time I had to deactivate it and activate it, there was a few times where I had to close the OBS, restart my computer, and then try and get it connected again. Now, that has basically been my experience with the HD60 S over the last few years, in that occasionally, if you disconnect something or change anything, you know, about your recording setup, you need to restart your computer, you need to connect everything again, you need to deactivate and activate, and you need to make sure that everything is working again. It's just a little bit fidgety that way where once it's connected, it always records great. I never have any problems, never. It's always been fantastic. But occasionally, for whatever reason, it's not there, you need to deactivate it, or you need to load up Elgato software and check the firmware, and then you need to activate it again. Now, I've not been using this long, but it's quite telling that every time I connected this, it just appeared because it's now plug and play. There's no drivers, and that alone is one reason to buy this over the HD60S. Now, I know that there's some people out there that don't have either of these devices. If you have the HD60S, you might be looking at the HD60S Plus. Now, should you upgrade? This is obviously a personal thing. It depends on your budget, and it also depends on what you're recording. If, like me, you don't have a PlayStation 4 Pro or an Xbox One X, there really isn't any reason for you to upgrade right now. If you're only going to capture at 1080p and you don't need HDR, both of these devices are very close to being identical, pretty much. I didn't really notice any difference during my test there. So if you're just recording at 1080p, you don't need HDR, you don't need the 4K pass-through, just keep the HD60S, just keep using it. If you don't have either of these devices, then it's a little bit different. I would say that if you're buying new and you want to buy new, then right now, the prices of these, I would say that you should always go for the S Plus every single time. Now, as I showed earlier, in the USA, I don't know why, but this wasn't listed on Amazon.com yet, but in the UK, this is $190, this is $140 right now. And if you're buying new, this is definitely worth the extra £50 because for one, it's plug and play. You'll never have to mess about with any firmware, any drivers, anything like that. It will just always work. But two, even if you don't need all of these additional features right now, HDR, 4K at 30 frames per second, 4K at 60 frames per second pass-through, even if you don't need them right now, if you buy that and just pay an extra £50, what you're doing is future-proofing yourself. You're future-proofing yourself so that if you do buy the PlayStation 5 next year or the Xbox One successor next year, you will have that functionality there so that you can record with the HDR. So at the prices they are right now, I would, if you're buying new, opt for the S Plus. Used, very different story because, well, the HD60 S Plus has only really been out for about a week or so. This has been out for years, so you can pick this up secondhand a lot cheaper. In fact, even when this was selling for $180, I picked this up secondhand for like $100. And this will go down even more now because this has come out. So if you are looking to save money, then I would probably opt for the HD60S. Now, of course, you don't get the plug and play. You don't get all those other features I've talked about. But there's so many people that have got this now that there's more used bargains out there. So if you can pick this up at 80, 90, something like that, you're going to get that at basically half the cost of the HD60S Plus. And, you know, as much as I love all the features here, if you're just looking to record at 1080p, you don't need HDR, you don't need all those extra features, save your money, buy this used. Generally speaking, you know, maybe you'll buy it and it doesn't have the box or might be missing a cable or something. But generally speaking, these are they're well looked after. They're solid, these things. They're made really well. They're definitely one of the best video capture devices as far as build quality goes. So I think these are made very well, which makes them a good device to buy used as well. So to summarise, buying new at the price they are right now, I would pay a little bit extra and get the HD60S Plus. If you're on a budget or you simply don't need the extra features that are on here, or you don't think you'll use them anytime soon, save yourself some money and buy used. Now, I bought this because I'm planning on recording here and downstairs. I don't want to be constantly messing about with my setup and changing things, which is why I've opted for 2 gameplay capture devices. But I paid $190 for the HD60 S Plus, and I'm really happy with it. But I knew I would be happy with it. I've had the HD60 S for a few years, and yes, there are some problems with the firmware, deactivating and activating it. Happens every now and then. But I've always been happy with it. It's always been fantastic. It captures the audio great. It captures the gameplay great. I've never had any problems with it. Once it's set up, I can always rely on it. And the HD60 S Plus is more of the same. This is the HD60 S, I don't know if you would say on steroids, but it's certainly an improvement. Elgato have made a few major improvements here. It's not a revolution, it's an evolution. They've just tweaked it. They've added a few extra things here, but they've made this a much more attractive device, and the addition of 4K at 30 frames per second recording as well, and plug and play, for me makes this a great device for me to have long term, because if I do change my setup in some way, I can use this to capture gameplay, I can use it to capture footage, I can use this in a lot of ways, and I don't have to mess about with any drivers or anything like that. So I'm very happy with the purchase. I can wholeheartedly recommend this. You will be pleased with this, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I'll leave links to the official website, to the Amazon sales page, etc. Do check out the other video. Do check out my other video as well, 4K at 30 frames per second. I've uploaded that video. I've also did a separate video showing the difference between these two devices at 60 frames per second as well. So please do check that out as well. If you're going to buy and you want to see the difference, please do check out that video as well. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.